My grandparents owned a machine shop, and they built these great big machines that would pull peanuts out of the ground and harvest peanuts. I would go there and I would smell the welding flux and the smell of grease, and it was this huge warehouse where big workshop, and you know, somebody up the other end would drop a piece of metal and it would clang and it would fill and I always loved that sound. The buzzing sound of a welder or a grinder or the saws and all that sort of thing. Whenever there was something, I'd always pull it apart, like a washing machine or whatever, and I would pull it apart. And I remember this one day, I had this great big, I was like 8, 10, I can't remember. This great big, it was like the washing cycle tub out of a really old washing machine, and it was the most awesome thing because I was pulling it apart, and it had electronic bits and motorized bits, and I was ripping this thing apart. And I rested my ear on it. It was acting kind of roughly like a speaker, and I could hear everything. But you know when you listen to the sea through a seashell? Kind of like that. When you put your ear up against this thing, it would pick up sound and it would do this wild, crazy thing to it. And it was awesome. And then I had a hammer and I just tapped this, and I was touching it with my fingers and listening to the way that the sounded. And I just knocked it with a hammer, not very loud. And of course, with my ear pushed against this thing, it was the most terrifyingly loud sound I've ever experienced in my head. And it resonated in my brain. And I remember that was like when I went, sound is this incredibly powerful thing. I'm really interested in the whole concept of tactile sound. Like, when I was in Sydney, a really close friend of mine, I have completely skipped the question. We'll get to it in a minute. Yeah, we'll talk about it. I was a kid, when I was in Sydney, I had a friend who was a photographer. He was a rock photographer, and my previous band called Jekyll Switch, he used to love shooting Jekyll Switch because Jekyll Switch is this wild, manic, fucking crazy thing. And he was deaf. And he would comment that he loved the feeling of war that would come off the stage whenever Jekyll Switch played. Me and him kind of came up with this idea that if you got a balloon, blew up the balloon and held the balloon in your fingers, you should try this. Hold the balloon in your fingers, because the tips of your fingers are technically better hearing than your ears are, because they can sense lower frequencies. There's one cycle. Mm-hmm. There's lots and lots of cycles than your ear can. Your ear's really this kind of bandwidth, but your fingers can feel higher cycles. So if you've got something that is converting sound into feeling, for example, a balloon filled with air, as the speakers are shaking the shit out of that balloon and resonating the air, the balloon is vibrating like a speaker. So when you're holding on to that with your fingertips nice and lightly, and you're hearing the music, like for him, he could hear everything perfectly when he did that because his brain went da-da-da-da-da, I can hear it. But when you're hearing it with a balloon in your hand, because you're getting this extra boost for your senses, you start hearing frequencies above your hearing abilities. You start hearing them. You hear them lower than your abilities. Because your brain just starts putting all this shit together and feeding it in there, and you go, whoa. So the first experience I had with the synthesizer, I had this book of great inventions, and I remember there were these two guys dressed up like Tron in this thing playing with a sequential 6-track, I recall, and I just went, oh my God, it's a synthesizer. And I was always into bands who had synthesizers. God, my grandma, I would always play with my grandma's old organ and the crappy drum machine in it, that I later found out was like a valve-driven drum machine, and it was just the greatest. Listening to Foxtrot and all that shit was great. But the first synth I bought myself, I worked in my dad's shop selling clothes. I can't escape clothes. Was a Casio CZ3000. And I fucking loved it. And the thing that first got me about it was the touch and the feel of it. And then the smell. I love the smell. That's why I love this shit, because it smells. And it's more than just sound. That's why I don't like soft synths. You know, I like putting my fingers on things, and I like feeling them get warm. I like smelling them. I like being able to hear when the emulator 3 is kind of clunking a bit, and okay, something's wrong with her. After the CZ3000, I got an SH101. Well, before that I went through a stage of go-karts. And that was also, with the go-karts, it was all about the sounds that they made, the rattling sounds, the humming of the motor, and an engine is just an oscillator. An oscillator is an engine. You know, I was changing the pitch with that thing and going faster. For me, as I mentioned before, sound is the art of sculpting air. It's wonderful how all of us who are into music and into the aware of the magics of electronics, and it is magic. You got to call it magic because you got to have something that's magic because it's that magical thing that's just outside the realm of what you understand. Because I don't understand this shit. It's magic to me. When I try to explain to someone how I make music, they don't get it. They go, oh, it's magic. When I see someone drawing a picture that's really amazing, how do you do that? It's magic. You know, maybe that's really unscientific and whatever. No, fuck off. That's fun. Mm-hmm. And music's about playing. And I think it's so important to have a sense of fun and mystery and childlike magic in this horribly oppressive world that we live in, that is using terrorism and fucking insurance and all of this shit to rape the wonder out of our spirit. Mm-hmm. And I think as musicians, we are reminding people what it is to be human. Mm-hmm. And that is so critically important to what we do. Wow, I have completely dissed your question. And we'll get back onto metaphysics in a moment. So it was a CZ3000, then I got an SH101. It was great. And then I got I had one of those crappy Roland DR110 220A drum machines. I used to record that on my crappy tape player thing because I couldn't multi-track because it was unheard of in the 90s and 80s. And I discovered distortion, and I discovered the joys of, you know, when you have a beautiful, clean tone and then you start really shifting it and distorting it, it becomes this wonderfully pretty thing.
Nice.
Thanks.